action with one another. Stewie's laughing. Caitlyn knows it's ridiculous. Just out there having a good time.
Look like Brianna, Stewart, and Sabrina Ionescu has broken their silence about this massacre they team just had.
A defending champion just got humbled on national television. And what happened in the post-game interviews might be more shocking than the blowout itself. The Indiana Fever walked into Madison Square Garden, faced the undefeated New York Liberty, and left with a 108-88 victory that nobody in the basketball world saw coming. But here's what makes this story actually matter. Instead of making excuses, the Liberty's biggest stars did something rarely seen at the championship level. They gave credit. Real credit. When you're the reigning champions, when your team started the season 9-0, when you're supposed to be the most dominant force in women's basketball right now, losing by 20 points to a team that's been missing its best player is supposed to sting. It's supposed to fuel excuses. It's supposed to create narratives about injuries, bad nights, unlucky bounces. But Sabrina Ionescu and Brianna Stewart didn't follow that script. Instead, they essentially told the world that they got outplayed by something special, and that's what makes this moment genuinely significant. The context here is crucial because without understanding what the Liberty were walking in as, you can't grasp just how dominant this performance really was. The Fever had been struggling. Caitlyn Clark, their franchise player, had been sidelined for 5 games due to injury. The Liberty, meanwhile, were arguably the hottest team in the league. They had the championship experience, the MVP-caliber players, the defensive identity that had been holding teams to under 90 points. This was supposed to be a statement game for New York. This was supposed to show that even without the Fever's star, Indiana was no real threat. Instead, everything got flipped. The Liberty entered Madison Square Garden with confidence, expecting to extend their perfect record against a team that had looked lost without Clark. They had the home crowd, the momentum, and the roster depth. But basketball has a funny way of humbling even the most prepared teams, and that's exactly what happened when Clark stepped back onto the court. When Clark returned, the basketball community witnessed what's being described as potentially one of the greatest individual performances in WNBA history. We're not talking about a good game. We're talking about a performance so dominant that established players who have competed at the highest levels internationally were left genuinely impressed. 17 made three-pointers as a team, with Clark at the center of it all. 7 assists. The kind of shot-making that seemed almost effortless despite missing 5 games. The Fever shot an absurd 49% from three-point range, and while that might seem like a team stat, the gravity of Clark's presence made everyone around her better. She didn't just score. She orchestrated an offensive explosion that left the Liberty scrambling for answers they never found.
Look like Brianna, Stewart, and Sabrina Ionescu has broken their silence about this massacre they team just had.
Action with one another. Stewie's laughing. Caitlyn knows it's ridiculous. Just out there having a good time.
The Liberty's defensive game plan was built around controlling pace and forcing teams into half-court sets. They wanted to slow the game down, limit transition opportunities, and make Indiana work for every basket. But Clark doesn't allow that. Her ability to push the ball immediately after a made basket or a defensive rebound meant the Fever were generating offense before the Liberty could even set their defense. That's a nightmare scenario for any team, but especially for one that prides itself on its half-court execution. The Liberty tried to adjust, tried to send extra defenders Clark's way, tried to deny her the ball entirely. Nothing worked. Every adjustment Indiana made was met with a counter, and every counter seemed to come from Clark's ability to read the defense and make the right play. What made this performance even more remarkable was the efficiency. Clark wasn't just taking a lot of shots and making a decent percentage. She was making shots that most players wouldn't even attempt. Logo threes, pull-up jumpers with a defender in her face, step-backs that created just enough space to get a clean look. These weren't bailout shots or heaves at the end of the shot clock. These were deliberate, confident attempts that went in with alarming regularity. And every time she made one, you could see the energy shift in the arena. The Fever's bench erupted. The Liberty's body language deflated. It was like watching a masterclass in shot-making, and everyone in the building knew they were witnessing something special.
We go on runs, they do as well. They're a great team. So I don't think it's defeating. I think obviously we know what a great shooter she is, and I think we just gave her too many easy ones. Obviously, she has great range, and her ability to get her shot off is really impressive, especially with missing some games. And so, obviously, on a personal level, I'm really happy to see her back out on the court, healthy, feeling good, because obviously it's important for them. But
The Fever's supporting cast deserves credit too, but only because Clark's presence gave them the space to operate. When a defense has to account for a player who can shoot from 30 feet away, it opens up driving lanes, creates open looks on the perimeter, and forces rotations that leave someone wide open. That's exactly what happened. The Fever's role players weren't just hitting open shots because they were having a hot night. They were hitting open shots because Clark's gravity pulled the defense out of position and created advantages that didn't exist when she was on the bench. It's one thing to have a great shooter on your team. It's another thing entirely to have a shooter who fundamentally changes how the opposing defense has to operate. And that's what Clark does every single time she steps on the court. The Liberty's coaching staff tried everything. They switched defensive assignments. They threw different looks at Clark. They tried to force the ball out of her hands and make someone else beat them. But Indiana's offense was too fluid, and Clark's decision-making was too sharp. Every time the Liberty made an adjustment, Clark found the counter. Every time they tried to take away her first option, she moved the ball to the open teammate and trusted them to make the play. That's the mark of a truly elite player, not just the ability to score, but the ability to make everyone around you better while still being the focal point of the offense. The Liberty had no answer, and by the fourth quarter, you could see the frustration setting in on their faces.
Performance we saw from Caitlyn Clark today against a team that started off the season 9-0, a team that is the defending champions, might have been the greatest women's basketball performance we have ever seen. That might have been the greatest showing from a WNBA player we have ever witnessed. That was spectacular. The shots she hit in this game, y'all, were something like I've never seen any other women basketball player ever come close to hitting. There are NBA superstars out there that I have not seen have a game with that.
The final score, 108-88, doesn't even capture how one-sided this game felt. There were stretches where the Fever were up by 25 or 30 points, and the Liberty couldn't string together enough stops to make a real run. Every time they'd score a basket or two, Clark would answer with a three-pointer or a drive to the rim that silenced any momentum they were trying to build. It was like watching a heavyweight fight where one fighter is just on another level, and no matter what the other fighter tries, they can't land a clean shot. The Liberty are a championship-caliber team. They have multiple all-stars and a coach who knows how to win. But on this night, they were completely outclassed, and the person responsible for that was the player they thought they could handle without. What Sabrina Ionescu said after the game is where this story gets interesting. She didn't downplay Clark's abilities or suggest the Liberty simply had an off night. Instead, she broke down the specifics of what Clark did that was so difficult to defend. "We gave her too many easy ones," Ionescu admitted. Let that sink in for a moment. One of the greatest three-point shooters the WNBA has ever seen is standing there, acknowledging that a player's talent is so exceptional, even supposedly easy looks turned into automatic buckets. Ionescu has hit three-pointers from distances that seem physically impossible. She's made a career on her range and shooting prowess. So when she's saying that Clark's range and ability to get shots off is impressive, when she's recognizing that missing 5 games somehow didn't affect Clark's shot-making whatsoever, that's not casual praise. That's professional respect.
We had our moments. We got back into the game. We had that run when Stewie was guarding Caitlyn Clark, but then they executed well. And, we had so many breakdowns on defense, and they made shots. They really punished us on that end, making, 17 threes from 35. It was just too wide open.
But there was another layer to Ionescu's comments that revealed even more about what transpired. She specifically mentioned being happy to see Clark back on the court and healthy. Now, that might sound like typical post-game pleasantries, but within the context of how badly the Liberty got outplayed, that comment meant something different. Ionescu wasn't just being diplomatic. She was acknowledging that what they just witnessed was so impressive that it transcended the competitive nature of the moment. You don't say something like that about a rival who just made your team look bad unless you genuinely respect what you saw. There's a difference between respecting someone's abilities and being impressed by a specific performance. Ionescu was expressing both, And that's what made her comments stand out from the usual post-game platitudes. The media has spent a lot of time trying to create narratives around Clark. They've tried to pit her against other players, suggested that her popularity was somehow a problem for the league, and framed her success as coming at the expense of others. But Ionescu's post-game comments completely dismantled that narrative. She didn't just praise Clark's performance. She did so with genuine enthusiasm and without any hint of resentment. That's significant because it shows that the supposed tension between Clark and other WNBA players is largely a media invention. The actual players, the ones competing on the court, recognize excellence when they see it, and they're not afraid to give credit where it's due. Ionescu's willingness to be so open about Clark's impact speaks volumes about her character and the respect she has for the game. Ionescu also touched on the difficulty of guarding Clark when she's coming off screens and using her teammates to create separation. She mentioned how Clark's ability to get her shot off quickly makes it nearly impossible to contest without fouling or leaving other players open. That's a nuanced observation that only someone who's actually defended Clark could make. It's easy for analysts and fans to talk about how good Clark is, but when a player of Ionescu's caliber is breaking down the specific reasons why Clark is so hard to guard, that carries a different weight. It's not just hype or speculation. It's firsthand experience from one of the best players in the world, and that's what makes her comments so compelling. The fact that Ionescu was willing to be so candid about her team's defensive failures also deserves attention. She could have easily deflected blame onto officiating, fatigue, or any number of external factors. Instead, she owned the loss and gave Clark the credit she earned. That takes a certain level of maturity and self-awareness that not every player possesses. In a league where egos and rivalries often dominate the conversation, Ionescu's response was a breath of fresh air. It showed that she values the integrity of the game more than her own reputation, and that's the kind of sportsmanship that elevates the entire league. There's also the timing of Ionescu's comments to consider. This wasn't a random regular season game that didn't matter. This was a matchup between two of the best teams in the league, with playoff implications and championship aspirations on the line. The Liberty were trying to prove that they were the team to beat, and the Fever were trying to show that they could compete without Clark. Instead, Clark returned and reminded everyone exactly why she's considered a generational talent. Ionescu recognized that in real time, and her post-game comments reflected that recognition. She wasn't just talking about a good game, she was talking about a performance that could define a season, and she had the grace to say so publicly. The ripple effects of Ionescu's comments extend beyond just this one game. When a player of her stature speaks so highly of an opponent, it sets a tone for the rest of the league. It shows that it's okay to acknowledge greatness, even when that greatness comes at your expense. It shows that competition and respect aren't mutually exclusive. And it shows that the WNBA is filled with players who care more about the growth of the game than about protecting their own egos. Ionescu's post-game interview wasn't just a response to a loss. It was a statement about what kind of league the WNBA is and what kind of players are in it. Finally, Ionescu's comments serve as a reminder of how rare it is to see a player like Clark come along. She's not just a good shooter or a good passer. She's a player who can take over a game in ways that we haven't seen before, and even the best players in the world are taking notice. Ionescu's willingness to be so open about that is a testament to both her character and Clark's talent. It's one thing to dominate a game. It's another thing entirely to earn the respect of your peers in the process, and that's exactly what Clark did against the Liberty. Brianna Stewart's approach to the loss took a slightly different angle, but it was equally revealing. As one of the most accomplished players in WNBA history, multiple championships, MVP awards, international experience at the highest levels, Stewart had every right to point fingers. She could have emphasized defensive breakdowns that weren't her responsibility. She could have mentioned officiating. She could have highlighted moments where her teammates made mistakes that weren't preventable. Instead, Stewart did something different entirely. She accepted that the Fever simply outplayed them on that particular evening and executed better when it mattered most. That's not something you hear from a player of her caliber very often, and it speaks to the magnitude of what the Fever accomplished. What made Stewart's response even more telling was her body language during the game itself. There's a moment that became iconic from this matchup, where Clark hit a logo 3, a shot from well beyond the three-point line that seemed almost disrespectful in its difficulty and distance. Stewart, standing nearby, didn't react with frustration or anger. She smiled. She seemed to acknowledge that she was witnessing something genuinely special, something that transcended the immediate result of the game. That's the response of a champion who understands excellence when she sees it, even when that excellence is coming at her team's expense. It's a moment that will be replayed for years, not just because of the shot itself, but because of Stewart's reaction to it. Stewart's post-game analysis went deeper into the defensive structure that broke down. She mentioned multiple defensive strategies that the Liberty attempted. They tried zones. They experimented with different coverages. They attempted to completely deny Clark the ball. None of it worked. That's not an excuse. It's a confession that their entire defensive identity got dismantled by one player's ability to affect the game in ways that championship-level coaching can't necessarily game plan around. When Stewart talks about defensive lapses and execution problems, she's not just describing poor play. She's describing what happens when one player has so much gravitational pull that it destabilizes an entire system. The Liberty's defensive stats from this game were historically bad. They allowed 108 points, 53 of which came in the first half alone. To put that in perspective, the Liberty had been holding teams to under 90 points per game, and they were considered one of the best defensive units in the league. But against the Fever, with Clark orchestrating the offense, they looked like a completely different team. The defensive rotations were slow. The closeouts were late. The communication was off. And all of those problems can be traced back to the attention that Clark demands from the defense. When one player requires that much focus, it creates cracks everywhere else, and the Fever exploited every single one of those cracks. Stewart's willingness to discuss those defensive failures publicly is noteworthy. She could have easily kept the specifics vague and talked about needing to play better as a team. Instead, she broke down exactly what went wrong and why. She talked about the difficulty of guarding Clark when she's coming off screens, the challenge of closing out on her without leaving driving lanes open, and the mental toll that defending a player like Clark takes over the course of a game. These are insights that only someone who's actually been on the court can provide, and they add a layer of depth to the post-game analysis that you don't usually get from players. There's also the psychological aspect of the loss that Stewart touched on. She mentioned how the Fever were able to maintain their energy and execution throughout the game, while the Liberty struggled to match their intensity. That's not just a physical issue, it's a mental one. When you're playing against a team that's making shots from everywhere on the court, it's easy to get frustrated and lose focus. The Liberty are a veteran team that's been through championship runs, so they're not supposed to let a single game affect their mentality. But Clark's performance was so dominant that it got inside their heads, and Stewart was honest enough to admit that. The respect that Stewart showed for Clark's game also extended to her teammates. She acknowledged that the Fever's role players stepped up and made shots when they were open, which is a direct result of the attention that Clark commands. It's easy to focus on Clark's individual stats, but Stewart recognized that her impact goes beyond points and assists. She makes everyone around her better, and that's what makes her so difficult to guard. You can't just focus on her, you have to account for the entire Fever offense, and that's a challenge that no team has figured out yet. Stewart's comments also highlighted the difference between a good performance and a historically great one. She's been in the league long enough to know what elite basketball looks like, and she's played alongside and against some of the best players in the world. For her to come out after a loss and praise an opponent the way she did, that's not something you take lightly. It's a recognition that what she witnessed was special, something that doesn't come around very often. And the fact that she was willing to say that publicly, in front of cameras and microphones, shows a level of respect that goes beyond typical post-game courtesy. The broader implications of Stewart's response are worth considering as well. When a player of her stature speaks so highly of an opponent, it sends a message to the rest of the league. It says that Clark is the real deal, that her impact is undeniable, and that anyone who underestimates her is making a mistake. It also says that the WNBA is a league where excellence is recognized and celebrated, even when it comes at the expense of the league's biggest stars. That's a powerful message, and it's one that will resonate throughout the rest of the season. Finally, Stewart's post-game comments serve as a reminder of the kind of player Clark is. She's not just a scorer or a shooter. She's a player who can break down a defense, elevate her teammates, and earn the respect of her opponents in the process. That's a rare combination, and it's what separates good players from truly great ones. Stewart recognized that, and her willingness to say so publicly is a testament to both her character and Clark's talent. The shooting numbers from this game tell a story that went far beyond luck or one team simply having a hot night. The Fever made 17 three-pointers on 35 attempts. The Liberty made 7 three-pointers on 35 attempts. That's not a small difference. That's a chasm. But here's what's important. That shooting disparity didn't happen randomly. It happened because of what Clark does to a defense. When one player can pull up from anywhere, including 30 feet away, and make it look routine, defenders have to make impossible choices. Do you stay home on the shooter and hope she misses? Do you go out to contest and leave driving lanes open? Do you try to deny her the ball entirely and watch her teammates get wide-open looks? The Liberty tried all of those options, and none of them worked. The Liberty's transition defense statistics from this game were particularly brutal, and that's where Clark's influence really shows itself. The Fever created 19 fast break opportunities, and that's not random either. That's what happens when one player can push pace, accelerate the game, and create scoring situations before defenses can even get set. Stewart acknowledged this by pointing out how difficult it became when they couldn't establish their half-court defense and force stops. The Liberty's entire identity is built on slowing teams down, controlling pace, and forcing teams into half-court sets where their defense is elite. Clark didn't allow that to happen. She controlled the tempo, and because she could create offense from anywhere on the court, Indiana had answers every single time New York managed to score. What makes the Liberty's loss even more significant is that they were supposed to have solved the Clark problem after 5 games of her being sidelined. They were supposed to be the team that showed everyone that Indiana couldn't compete without their star. Instead, they got a visceral reminder that when Clark is healthy, the dynamic of the entire league shifts. That's not an exaggeration. That's what the post-game comments from their own players indicate. When defending champions are openly questioning whether they're still the best team when everyone is healthy, when they're admitting that a loss to a team they should have beaten comfortably has forced them to reevaluate their position in the league hierarchy, something significant just happened. Ionescu's observation that basketball is a game of runs was particularly insightful because it showed she wasn't chalking this up to a lucky shooting night or momentary momentum. She was recognizing that Indiana sustained their dominance throughout the game, executed their strategy consistently, and didn't just get hot for a quarter. She was giving credit to sustained excellence, not fleeting fortune. That distinction matters because any team can have a good quarter. Not every team can maintain that level of execution across a full game against a championship-level opponent. The Fever did, and Ionescu was honest enough to acknowledge it. The Liberty's free throw disparity also contributed to the narrative in ways that Stewart acknowledged. New York actually got more foul calls, but they still couldn't generate enough easy scoring opportunities to keep pace with Indiana's offensive explosion. That's not a complaint about officiating. It's a recognition that despite getting favorable whistle, they still couldn't compete offensively. Stewart's admission that they didn't reach the rim frequently enough speaks to how Clark's perimeter presence and three-point range made it harder to find driving lanes and get into the paint where they could have earned more free throws. The Fever essentially forced the Liberty to play outside of their comfort zone, and New York never adjusted. From a coaching perspective, Sandy Brindello, the Liberty's head coach, also took the high road in her post-game assessment. She didn't make excuses. She didn't point to missing players or bad luck. She simply acknowledged that the Fever played better and made their shots when it counted. When a championship-level coach gives an opponent full credit without caveats, it tells you that the performance they witnessed was legitimate and remarkable. Coaches at that level understand how to contextualize wins and losses. They know how to identify where breakdowns happened and what could have been done differently. When they're giving credit instead of analyzing, it means the performance transcended typical basketball analysis. The narrative that media outlets had been pushing about Clark versus other WNBA players became essentially irrelevant after this game. The supposed competitive tension, the idea that Clark was somehow dividing the league or creating drama, all of that dissolved the moment the Liberty lost decisively, and their own players responded with respect instead of defensiveness. Both Ionescu and Stewart could have fed into whatever narrative the media wanted to create. They could have played the role of defending champions annoyed by an upstart. Instead, they chose authenticity. They chose to acknowledge what they'd just witnessed rather than protect their egos. And in doing so, they elevated the conversation around the game and the league as a whole. When players who have competed at the international level, who have represented their countries on the biggest stages, who have faced the absolute elite of women's basketball worldwide, when those players are saying that someone's performance is exceptional, that carries weight. Ionescu has played against the best players on the planet. Stewart has won gold medals and competed against the world's elite. Their assessment of Clark's talent isn't coming from a place of ignorance. It's coming from genuine expertise and extensive experience at the absolute highest levels of competition. That's why their post-game comments resonated so deeply with fans and analysts alike. This wasn't just two players being nice after a loss. This was two of the best players in the world acknowledging that they'd just witnessed something truly special. The distinction that Ionescu made between skilled shooters and exceptional scorers revealed another layer of understanding. She wasn't just acknowledging that Clark makes open shots. She was highlighting that Clark creates and makes shots under pressure, when defenses are collapsed on her, when the game is on the line. That's the mark of truly elite scorers. Plenty of players can hit open three-pointers. The rare ones are the ones who can make difficult shots with defenders draped all over them, and Clark demonstrated that consistently throughout this game. Ionescu, having faced the world's best, recognized that distinction immediately. She knows what it takes to score at the highest level, and she saw that same ability in Clark. Stewart's comments about defensive communication issues weren't pointing to careless mistakes or lack of effort. She was indicating that Clark's mobility, court vision, and decision-making forced defenders into snap judgments that often turned out to be wrong. Championship-level teams operate with refined communication and defensive schemes that have been drilled countless times. When one player can consistently put 5 defenders in untenable situations, when she can make the right pass to the open teammate before defenses can react, entire systems start to break down. That's not poor communication. That's elite offense overwhelming elite defense. And Stewart, having been on the receiving end of that offense, was able to articulate exactly why it was so difficult to stop. The conversation around the tempo of the game became relevant because Clark's comeback fundamentally altered how the game was played. The Liberty normally control pace and dictate rhythm. They're used to playing at a tempo that favors their defensive identity and execution. But Clark's presence forced them to play at a faster pace, and that benefited Indiana's players and strategic approach. Stewart's recognition of this demonstrates understanding that Clark doesn't just score points, she influences the fundamental rhythm of how basketball is played. That's a characteristic of transcendent players. They don't just participate in the game, they reshape it around themselves, and everyone else has to adjust. The shot selection itself became a talking point because it wasn't just about making difficult shots. It was about making the right decisions under pressure. Clark consistently made the correct basketball choices at crucial moments, even while making seemingly contested or difficult shots. Ionescu's acknowledgement of this reveals an appreciation for the decision-making component of elite scoring. Anyone can get lucky and make a difficult shot. The truly great ones make difficult shots because they've made the right read and decision beforehand. That's the difference between a volume scorer and an efficient one, and Clark is the latter. She doesn't force bad shots. She creates good ones through her understanding of the game and her ability to read defenses. Clark's return instantly restored the Fever's offensive identity in ways that extended far beyond her individual numbers. Players who had seemed uncertain and struggled to find rhythm during her absence suddenly looked poised and confident. Stewart recognized this as more than individual genius. It was a single player elevating everyone around her. That's where the impact really shows itself. It's not just in the statistics. It's in how teammates perform, how the entire offense flows, how everyone's confidence level shifts. A player who can produce that kind of effect is operating at a level that transcends standard basketball analysis. She's not just a player, she's a system unto herself, and the Fever's offense runs through her in a way that makes everyone else better. The offensive advantages that Clark creates for her teammates became evident in the shooting percentages and the ease with which the Fever's role players found rhythm. Because defenses had to account for Clark's range and ability to score from anywhere on the court, her teammates got looks that were significantly easier than what they'd be seeing against a typical opponent. Stewart's admission that they gave up too many open ones demonstrated understanding that Clark's presence as a scorer generates advantages that ripple throughout the entire offense. It's not just about her points. It's about the opportunities she creates for everyone else. That's the hallmark of a truly elite player, the ability to make the entire team better just by being on the court. The Fever's preparation for this matchup also played a role, with them targeting specific Liberty vulnerabilities and offensive patterns that championship teams usually manage to conceal. But the execution of these strategic advantages was fundamentally dependent on Clark's ability to read defenses and make the right decisions in real time. Once Clark found her rhythm, the momentum shift seemed to align in Indiana's favor consistently. That's because when you have a player capable of creating offense from anywhere on the court, you always have a response. When the Liberty scored runs, the Fever weren't left searching for answers. They had Clark, and that was enough. The statistical breakdown of Clark's game demonstrated dominance across multiple categories. Her 7 assists showed that her excellence extended beyond scoring, revealing her ability to elevate teammate performances and impact winning in ways beyond individual point totals. Ionescu's assessment of Clark's complete game illustrated understanding that truly exceptional players affect winning in numerous ways simultaneously. They score, they assist, they create advantages for teammates, they influence pace and rhythm, they control defensive attention. That's what separates good players from generational talents. Clark didn't just have a great scoring night, she had a great all-around game, and the numbers back that up. The championship implications of this defeat were profound, and both Stewart and Ionescu acknowledged that directly. They admitted that with Clark healthy, losing to the Fever fundamentally changes the perception of who the league's top team actually is. Defending champions don't make that kind of admission lightly. That's a confession that the league's power dynamic shifted the moment Clark returned to the court. That's an acknowledgement that despite their perfect record, despite their dominance, the Fever with a healthy Clark represent a threat that's different in magnitude. It's one thing to lose a game. It's another thing entirely to lose confidence in your own status as the league's best team, and that's exactly what happened to the Liberty. The level of respect demonstrated in those post-game comments transcends typical professionalism. Both athletes recognized something that went beyond a single good performance. They'd witnessed a demonstration of ability that reaffirmed Clark's status as a generational talent, someone who operates at a level that even elite players have to genuinely respect. They showed the kind of sportsmanship that elevates the league as a whole by being willing to give credit where it's genuinely due, even when that credit comes at the expense of their own reputation as the league's best team. That's not something you see every day, and it's a testament to the character of both Ionescu and Stewart. The fact that defending champions publicly praised the player who just made them look foolish on national television sends a message that's impossible to ignore. It's a message that says what they witnessed was so impressive, so dominant, so exceptional that the normal competitive framework almost becomes secondary to the recognition of excellence. Instead of offering justifications or deflections, Ionescu and Stewart chose respect. They chose acknowledgement. They chose to be honest about what they'd just seen. And in doing so, they set a standard for how athletes should respond to being outplayed. It's easy to be gracious when you win. It's much harder to be gracious when you lose, especially when you lose as badly as the Liberty did. The shooting disparity, the defensive breakdowns, the tempo changes, the free throw differences, the transition defense struggles, all of these individual elements combine to create a complete picture of systematic dominance. But what made this game truly significant wasn't just the magnitude of the defeat. It was the response from the vanquished. The Liberty didn't make excuses. They didn't get defensive about their ranking or their reputation. They acknowledged that they'd been beaten by something special, and that acknowledgement carries weight that few post-game interviews ever achieve. It's the kind of moment that will be remembered not for the final score, but for what it revealed about respect, excellence, and the gap that can exist between good players and truly transcendent ones. The broader implications of this game extend beyond just the Fever and the Liberty. It's a statement about the direction of the WNBA and the kind of players who are shaping its future. Clark represents a new generation of athletes who are redefining what's possible on the basketball court, and the fact that established stars like Ionescu and Stewart are acknowledging that so openly is significant. It shows that the league is in good hands, that the talent level is rising, and that the best players are pushing each other to be better. That's what makes sports compelling, and it's what makes this particular moment so memorable. The respect that Ionescu and Stewart showed for Clark also speaks to the culture of the WNBA. This is a league that has fought for recognition, for equal pay, for basic respect from the sports world. The players understand that they're part of something bigger than themselves, and they carry themselves with a professionalism that reflects that understanding. When Ionescu and Stewart praised Clark, they weren't just being good sports. They were showing the world that the WNBA is a league where excellence is celebrated, where competition is fierce but respectful, and where the players genuinely want each other to succeed. That's a powerful message, and it's one that resonates far beyond the basketball court. There's also the question of what this means for the rest of the season. The Liberty were supposed to be the team to beat, the clear favorites to win the championship. But this loss exposed vulnerabilities that other teams will try to exploit. If the Fever can beat them this badly with Clark, what happens when they face other teams that have similar offensive firepower? The Liberty will need to regroup, adjust their defensive schemes, and find ways to compete with a team that has a player who can single-handedly change the complexion of a game. That's a challenge that no team in the league has figured out yet, and it's going to be fascinating to see how they respond. Clark's performance also raises the question of where she ranks among the all-time greats of the WNBA. She's still early in her career, but the impact she's having is already being compared to some of the league's legends. When players like Ionescu and Stewart, who have won championships and MVP awards, are praising her the way they are, it's a sign that she's on a trajectory that could lead to a Hall of Fame career. That's a bold statement for someone who's only been in the league for a short time, but the evidence is hard to argue with. She's not just a good player, she's a transformative one, and that's a rare thing in any sport. The media coverage of this game also deserves attention. For weeks, there had been narratives about Clark being overrated, about her popularity being a problem for the league, about the supposed tension between her and other players. But after this game, those narratives were completely dismantled. The Liberty's own players, the ones who were supposed to be at odds with Clark, were the ones praising her the most. That's a powerful rebuttal to all the noise and speculation, and it shows that the reality of the situation is very different from what the media has been portraying. The players respect each other, they recognize excellence, and they're not afraid to say so. The fan reaction to this game was also noteworthy. Social media was flooded with clips of Clark's highlights, and the post-game comments from Ionescu and Stewart went viral. Fans were praising not just Clark's performance, but the sportsmanship shown by the Liberty's stars. It was a moment that brought the basketball community together, and it showed that there's a hunger for positive, respectful competition in sports. In a world where hot takes and controversy often dominate the conversation, this was a refreshing change of pace, and it's a big part of why this game resonated with so many people. The historical context of this game is also worth considering. The WNBA has been around for decades, and there have been many great players and memorable moments. But there's something different about what Clark is doing. She's not just putting up good numbers, she's changing the way the game is played. Her range, her shooting ability, her court vision, these are things that we haven't seen before in the women's game, and they're forcing defenses to adapt in ways that they never had to before. That's the mark of a truly special player, and it's why this game will be remembered as a turning point in the league's history. The impact of this game on the Fever's season can't be overstated. They were struggling without Clark, and there were questions about whether they could compete for a championship. But her return changed everything. Suddenly, they look like a team that can beat anyone on any given night, and that's a dangerous thing in a league where parity is the norm. The Fever have the talent, the coaching, and now the confidence to make a deep playoff run, and it's all because of the player who wears number 22. The legacy of this game will be defined not just by the final score, but by the way it changed the conversation around the WNBA. For years, the league has been fighting for recognition, for media coverage, for the kind of respect that the men's game takes for granted. But moments like this, moments where the best players in the world are acknowledging a generational talent, where the competition is fierce but respectful, where the game itself is the star, those are the moments that change perceptions. This game was a showcase for everything that makes the WNBA great, and it's a reminder that the league is filled with incredible athletes who deserve to be celebrated. The question now is what happens next. The Liberty will have to regroup and figure out how to bounce back from a loss that clearly shook their confidence. The Fever will have to maintain the momentum and prove that this wasn't just a one-game fluke. And Clark will have to continue to perform at this level, which is a challenge that she's shown she's more than capable of meeting. The rest of the season is going to be fascinating to watch, and this game will be remembered as the moment when everything changed. There's also the question of what this means for the future of the WNBA. Clark is a young player with a long career ahead of her, and if she continues to perform at this level, she could become one of the greatest players in league history. That's a bold statement, but the evidence is there. She has the talent, the work ethic, and the competitive drive to achieve something truly special, and the fact that her peers are already recognizing that is a sign of things to come. The WNBA is entering a new era, and Clark is at the forefront of it. The respect that Ionescu and Stewart showed for Clark also sets a precedent for how players should conduct themselves in the public eye. In an age where hot takes and controversy often dominate the sports conversation, their response was a breath of fresh air. They showed that it's possible to be competitive and respectful at the same time, that you can acknowledge greatness without diminishing your own accomplishments, and that sportsmanship is still a valuable trait in professional athletics. That's a message that resonates far beyond the basketball court, and it's one that the WNBA should be proud of. The fans also played a role in making this moment special. The energy in Madison Square Garden was electric, and the reaction to Clark's performance was overwhelmingly positive. Fans were on their feet, cheering for both teams and appreciating the level of play that they were witnessing. That's what sports should be about, bringing people together, creating shared experiences, and celebrating excellence. This game did all of that, and it's a big part of why it will be remembered as one of the defining moments of the season. The media will continue to try to create narratives around Clark and the WNBA, but moments like this make it hard to sustain negative storylines. When the best players in the league are praising an opponent, when the competition is this high level, when the game itself is this entertaining, it's difficult to manufacture drama. The reality is that the WNBA is in a great place, the talent level is higher than ever, and the future is bright. This game was a reminder of that, and it's a story that will be told for years to come. Finally, this game serves as a reminder of why we watch sports in the first place. It's not just about wins and losses. It's about witnessing greatness, about seeing athletes push the boundaries of what's possible, about being part of something bigger than ourselves. Clark's performance, and the response it elicited from Ionescu and Stewart, was a perfect example of that. It was a moment that transcended the game itself and became something more, a celebration of excellence, a testament to the power of sports, and a reminder of why we fell in love with basketball in the first place. A defending champion got humbled, and the response from their biggest stars was something nobody expected. Instead of excuses, we got respect. Instead of deflections, we got honesty. And instead of a typical post-game interview, we got a moment that will be remembered for years to come. The Indiana Fever didn't just beat the New York Liberty. They changed the conversation around the WNBA, and Caitlyn Clark was at the center of it all. When the best players in the world are praising an opponent, when the competition is this fierce but this respectful, when the game itself is this entertaining, that's when you know you're witnessing something special. This wasn't just a basketball game. It was a statement. and the basketball world is still processing what it means. 3 players respecting each other on court. This serves as a perfect bookend to the entire narrative.